Who could have imagined that one of the most powerful men in the United States of the 20th century would end his journey not in the splendor of power, but in the silence of the semi-dismantled halls of his own palace? That a man who shaped the country's public opinion, created political crises, and determined the fate of presidents, would find himself a prisoner of his own architectural marvel. The story of Hearst Castle begins not with grandeur, but with an almost mundane request. William Randolph Hearst, a media magnate, heir to a gold miner's fortune, in 1919 told an architect, "I want a small house on the hill. Something simple." No one knew that this modest phrase would become the starting point for one of America's most magnificent structures. The contrast here was already born at the moment of the first meeting, a modest desire from a man who had never been modest. Hearst grew up amidst luxury, but his dream seemed almost childlike. He wanted to bring back the sense of his childhood, to spend time on his parents' land, on San Simeon Hill, where tents once stood, not palaces. This was the enigma. Why would a media magnate with dozens of homes and mansions need another one, and a small one at that? Why did a man whose power was measured not by walls but by newspaper circulations yearn so much for a place that once served his family only as a temporary summer refuge? The world around was rapidly changing. The First World War had ended just a year ago. Old empires were crumbling, new ideas were being born everywhere. America was entering an era of big money, big fears, and big ambitions. But Hearst, accustomed to looking beyond the horizon, saw in this time an opportunity to build what no one in the country had yet attempted: his own Rome, his own acropolis of power and taste. And yet, in the early days of this project, he seemed to resist his own destiny. He spoke to architect Julia Morgan, California's first female architect, about a cozy bungalow. He wrote in letters that he simply wanted a roof over his head, a place where he could rest from the bustling world of San Francisco and New York. But one only had to look at the hill to realize a small house would not survive here. The height, the wind, the ocean panorama, all of it demanded scale, and Hearst, a man of eternal competition, could not resist it. His dream began to swell, like a sail catching a new wind. The house grew into a project, the project into an idea, the idea into a symbol. And yet, behind this rising grandeur, a barely discernible shadow lurked. The shadow of a man who was surrounded by glory, but never learned to feel at home. The shadow of a boy who spent his childhood amidst his father's expeditions and endless improvements to the family ranch, but never once had his own corner, built according to his will. Thus begins a story that seems disproportionate to an ordinary human life. A story of how one dream grew to the size of an empire, and why it also became the cause of its demise. When Julia Morgan first ascended to the summit of San Simeon, she saw not a place for a small house, but a stage, as if created for an ancient tragedy. 3 hills converged into one line. The ocean lay below like liquid silver, and the wind carried the scents of sage and dust. This was not a plot of land, but a space that demanded an architectural response. Morgan felt it immediately, and surprisingly so did Hearst. For some time, he still pretended that the project would remain modest. But pretense is a luxury that coexists poorly with genius. Within a few months, the small house began to transform into Casa Grande, and a year later, into a concept capable of consuming not only the media magnate's money, but also a decade of his life. But it wasn't about luxury. Hearst had built before. He bought paintings, furniture, churches, fountains. He bought everything that could be moved and placed in a new location. His passion as a collector was almost pathological. He didn't collect things, he collected proof. Proof of taste, power, status. But here, on the hill, he encountered for the first time something he couldn't buy ready-made. Walls, staircases, endless arches, everything had to be created from scratch. And it was precisely in this that the conflict was born, which would accompany the project until its last day. Julia Morgan was an architect of order, Hearst an architect of chaos. He wanted a cathedral tower, and she designed it. A week later, he wanted two. He dreamed of a Roman pool. She began the calculations. Then he wanted it a little bigger, until a little transformed into a new foundation and new geometry. He brought her drawings found in books and demanded, "This here." She didn't argue. She did it. But every time she solved one problem, Hearst invented two more. The house grew like an organism, illogically, unpredictably, but alive. Sometimes it seemed to grow faster than its builders could lay bricks. And in this vigorous growth lay Hearst's new strength. He had found a project that could rival the scale of his ambitions. And yet, behind this never-ending construction, another motive was hidden, one that Hearst never spoke aloud. He was not just building a house, he was building memory. He was trying to bring back what no billionaire could, the feeling of a family that had long been gone. His parents' ranch disappeared along with their lives. The tents, the smells, the campfires, all vanished into the past. And in some strange, touching form, Hearst tried to recreate his past through impossible grandeur, as if by building an enormous palace, he could prevent the loss of what had long since disappeared. Every new hall, every tower, every courtyard was not just architecture. These were memories that he was turning into stone, so they could no longer evaporate. Thus, Hearst Castle emerged not as a media magnate's palace, but as an attempt to stop time. By the mid-1920s, Hearst Castle could no longer be called a house. It had become a miniature city, or more precisely, a vision city that could only be born in the mind of a person living simultaneously in the past and the future. Work was in full swing day and night. On the hill, cement mixers rumbled, cranes stretched, hammers clanged, stonecutters from Italy, Mexico, Greece were busy. In the evenings, the wind carried the smell of lime and hot metal across the entire coast. Meanwhile, Hearst continued to bring in new treasures. Every week brought something absurd: medieval panels from Spanish monasteries, Flemish tapestries, antique statues, bas-reliefs, fountain basins, stained glass, gates, columns. He bought not objects, but entire eras, and demanded that each of them find its place in his castle. And this created problems. Morgan designed the space relying on logic and style. Hearst, however, relied only on emotional impulse. If he liked a 14th century door, it had to stand here, in this wall. Didn't fit in size? The wall had to be rebuilt. Didn't the style match? Then change the style. Workers already joked that the castle would never be completed because its owner was building not a building, but a caprice. To some extent, they were right. But there was also another perspective, the perspective of those who came here for the first time. For Hearst's guests, this place seemed like a miracle. Hollywood actors, directors, politicians, financiers, they ascended the hill along the Serpentine Road and were speechless. The castle shone above the ocean like a mirage. At night, the towers glowed with electric garlands. The pool reflected the moonlight, and the air was filled with the scent of flowers from 36 gardens that Morgan had designed with almost monastic precision. But hidden within this luxury was a strange cruelty. Hearst Castle became a trap for its creator. By day, he gave orders at the construction site. In the evening, he dictated articles for his newspapers. At night, he hosted guests and tried to appear the master of the festivities. But he found no real peace anywhere. The walls he erected seemed too narrow to him, the rooms too empty, the guests too transient. Even his relationship with Marion Davies, the actress he loved, became part of the scenery. She rejoiced in his attention, while he tried through her to fill some inner void that no palace could cover. And yet the castle grew. Even when money began to leave faster than it came in, even when Hearst's political ambitions began to destroy his own empire, even when his newspapers, for the first time in many years, began to show losses, he could not stop, as if every new stone gave him one more day of conviction that his world was under control. But Morgan saw that control was slipping away. She knew every building carries the character of its creator, and Hearst Castle was becoming increasingly unpredictable, just like the man who directed it. By the late 1920s, Hearst Castle had reached a grandeur that simultaneously astonished and troubled. It became a symbol of luxury that America had not yet known. People down below in San Simeon told legends that the water in the pools was heated to the temperature of the Mediterranean Sea, that wines of European kings were stored in the cellars, that Hearst had built his own zoo, and that in the evenings lions roared on the hillsides. These legends were true. Almost entirely. Hearst indeed created a private menagerie. Zebras grazed on the hills, antelopes proudly climbed the ledges, and chimpanzees lived in specially built houses. He wanted guests, as they drove up the winding road, to feel like visitors to a fantastic kingdom. And they did. But the grander the castle became, the higher its hidden cracks rose. The first crack was financial. Hearst built as if money were endless, but his media empire was starting to falter. Newspapers were losing readers, expenses were growing, political campaigns he financed were failing. Assets melted like ice in the California sun. He took out loans, sold shares, but the construction still consumed more than the business brought in. Hearst Castle became a bottomless cup that could not be filled. The second crack was personal. Marion Davies, his inimitable companion, increasingly caught him in moments of confusion. She knew that he didn't sleep at night, that he read profit and loss statements, that he furrowed his brow when he thought about how to preserve both the castle and his reputation. She also knew that his family was pressuring him. Hearst was still married, and his sons could not openly accept Marion. In her eyes, he was becoming not the Lord of the Hill, but a man afraid of falling. The third crack, the quietest, was architectural. The project had grown to a size it was never designed for. The towers became heavier than the hill's foundations allowed. Water in the pools seeped into the ground, requiring new pipes, new pumps, new reconstructions. Every northern wall suffered from winds from the Pacific Ocean, as if time itself was trying to destroy this attempt to defy it. Morgan saw all of this, but she remained silent, not out of fear, but out of understanding. She knew Hearst was not building the castle for luxury. He was building it as a shield. And like any shield made of illusions, it was bound to crack sooner or later. In 1929, the world collapsed along with the Wall Street stock market, and the blow landed directly on the heart of Hearst's empire. Newspapers closed one after another, advertisers disappeared, revenues plummeted, and the construction on the hill cost hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. And then, for the first time in his life, Hearst did what he feared most. He began to cut back on his own dreams. He asked Morgan to reduce estimates, to freeze the towers, to postpone new projects. She listened and complied, but knew it was temporary. The grandeur of the castle became its burden. And Hearst, who had always managed cities from the newsrooms of his newspapers, for the first time felt powerless before his own creation. He continued to host guests, smile, tell stories, but everyone saw his brilliance had become thinner, like gilding that had been rubbed too long. San Simeon Hill was no longer his throne. It was becoming his prison. Sometimes external grandeur grips a person so tightly that the soul begins to crack from within. On San Simeon Hill, it happened quietly. No one heard the first sharp snap. But the subsequent cracks could no longer be hidden. In the early 30s, the financial crisis fully hit Hearst. He owed millions, sums that, when converted to the modern economy, amounted to decades of labor for thousands of people. Banks demanded he sell collections, stop construction, cut expenses. There was more pain in each of these words than in any political defeat he had experienced before. But the real tragedy lay not in the numbers. It was in what Hearst feared to admit even to himself. His own project had begun to live without him. He no longer managed the details. He didn't choose the stone, didn't argue about the shape of the columns, didn't plan another fountain. Even Morgan, usually calm and resilient, noticed that he avoided discussing deadlines and blueprints. His attention lacked the strength to encompass what he had once envisioned. Then Marion Davies re-entered the scene, a person whom everyone saw as a light of comedy, but few knew how firm she could be. She saw what was happening. Hearst was ceasing to be himself. He fell into fits of anxiety. He spent hours trying to balance budgets instead of admiring the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, which used to inspire him to build a new tower or terrace. He became irritable, sometimes harsh, and most importantly, withdrawn. Marion did what no one else did. She began to sell assets she had earned herself to save him from bankruptcy. Accounts from contemporaries indicate that she sold jewelry, real estate, her own investments. She didn't demand gratitude. She simply understood that if the castle collapsed, Hearst would collapse with it. But there was also a flip side. Hearst's sons saw how their father gave almost all his emotional space to another woman, not their mother. They understood that Marion was not just an actress, not just a companion. She was the center of his world. This tore apart a family that was already living separately. Here, the moral ambivalence that always followed Hearst became apparent. He loved, he inspired, he created. But in the process, he destroyed the quiet inner spaces of other people without even noticing it. His wife Millicent was in New York, immersed in philanthropy. She did not seek confrontation, but her absence became a symbolic void. The family and the empire physically existed, but the connection between their parts no longer did. It was during this period that the construction of Hearst Castle became a reflection of inner conflict rather than an outward triumph. It was still a house of grandeur, but no longer a master's home. The towers, like a mirror, showed his fear of losing control. The pools, an illusion of depth that was no longer there. The frescoes, a stillness that Hearst sought in the chaos of his life. Guests who visited in those years described him as a man trying to be his old self, but whose eyes revealed something new: weariness, uncertainty, perhaps even shame. This was the moment when he could have stopped, but he couldn't. Everything Hearst did in life was forward motion. And now, that very motion was pushing him towards the abyss. Crisis does not come alone. It moves in a wave, sweeping away the supports that a person considered unshakable. For Hearst, this wave rose in the mid-30s, when creditors stopped believing in his ability to hold on to the empire. The time for negotiations was over. It was time for concessions. This moment marked the beginning of his internal breaking point. Hearst Castle, which he built as a personal pantheon, now demanded sacrifices. Banks insisted. Collections must be sold, construction frozen, expenses cut almost to zero. This jeopardized the entire meaning of the grandiose project. The castle, conceived as the embodiment of his will, became a symbol that Hearst no longer controlled his own destiny. This blow was stronger than any economic obligation. It was the sixth hook turn when personal ambition was forced for the first time to yield to the necessity of understanding. Power is exhausted, and a new meaning must be sought. The transformation began with a simple, yet almost impossible step: acknowledgement. Hearst agreed to what he had refused for years: to sell part of the collections, to reduce staff, to halt new projects. It was a slow, painful renunciation of his former self. And yet, at this moment, Marion re-entered the scene. But now she looked different, not as a savior, but as someone who understood the inevitability of change. Contemporaries recalled she did not persuade Hearst to resist. She urged him to think about the future, about what would remain when he was gone. And this conversation became a turning point. For the first time, Hearst began to view the castle not as a personal fortress, but as a potential legacy, not as a place of power, but as a place of memory. Marion spoke of how such a house should be seen by people, that art should be accessible, that true greatness is not in possession, but in transmission. This aligned with what many philanthropists of the era were doing. They were transforming private collections into public goods, recognizing the fragility of personal wealth in the face of history. The idea gradually took root. In the late 1930s, Hearst began negotiations with the state of California about the castle's future, officially concerning the preservation of the land, unofficially acknowledging that an object of such scale could not be maintained by one person. He was not yet ready to voice it, but the idea of transforming Hearst Castle into a public monument first entered his consciousness, painfully but clearly. Meanwhile, his health deteriorated. He climbed fewer stairs, walked less on the terraces, and rarely looked into the pools. The castle, built as the stage of his power, was becoming too grand for a man who could no longer embrace it. Construction finally stopped. The castle acquired areas that remained unfinished: incomplete rooms, empty niches, uninstalled columns. They became a physical reflection of his re-evaluated purpose. What was conceived as an endless creation, for the first time, found finality. And in this finality, there was meaning. Hearst stopped striving to conquer time. He began to think about how to integrate his work into its flow. The castle became not a fortress against oblivion, but a bridge to future generations. When a person builds something greater than themselves, there always comes a moment when the creation begins to live a life of its own. For William Randolph Hearst, this moment arrived in the late 1930s, when the castle, having grown atop San Simeon Hill, no longer depended on its creator. It became part of the landscape, historical, cultural, emotional, and then came what he could not stop. Hearst moved from San Simeon to Los Angeles in the early 1940s. The official reason was health problems. He could no longer climb the castle's endless stairs. Unofficially, he was retreating. The castle, into which he had breathed 30 years of his existence, became heavier than any physical burden. After his departure, San Simeon fell silent. The guest houses emptied. The enormous dining hall no longer heard lively discussions of politics and cinema. The towers continued to stand, but the air within them was different, as if the house itself held its breath, awaiting what would come next. Hearst died in the autumn of 1951, never returning to live in his castle. At that moment, the fate of Hearst Castle remained open. The family was unable to maintain such a massive structure. Debts still loomed. Decisions were needed that went beyond personal interests. And this is where the final turn occurred, the very one that reverses the entire story and forces a new look at every part of it. In 1958, the Hearst family transferred the castle to the state of California. Without secret conditions, without an attempt to retain private control, they gave what many considered the most expensive privately owned property in the United States of America into the hands of the public. And San Simeon became a public museum. The castle opened its doors not to magnates, not to actors, not to politicians, but to school children, tourists, art historians, ordinary families. People for the first time saw the Neptune pool of white marble, halls with Flemish tapestries, rooms with ceilings from Italian cathedrals, libraries with incunabula. And this moment became a true point of rebirth. The project, conceived as one man's private empire, became a shared legacy. It is precisely in this the main paradox of Hearst Castle's history. What was created as an attempt to build his own Rome ended up becoming a public memory. What began as a quest for absolute personal power transformed into an act of transmission and service. It is precisely here that the story becomes modern. Today, when we look at Hearst Castle, we see not just an architectural masterpiece, we see a question. What will remain of our ambitions when we are gone? Will they become a heavy burden for others or a gift to the future? Hearst teaches us that grandeur built for oneself will bring pain, but grandeur passed on to the world transforms into eternity. Every column of this castle, a reminder that success without meaning turns into stone. Every tower, that a dream must be larger than a man, otherwise it will crush him. Every unfinished room, that incompleteness can also become a legacy, if understood correctly. Hearst Castle became an American Gatsby made of stone. Scale, luxury, fall, all are present. But the ending is different. Where Gatsby drowned in his own illusions, Hearst, through pain, debts, love, ambitions, and losses, nevertheless built something that outlived him. This makes his story not a tragedy, but a warning, and not a failure, but a lesson. A lesson that the grandest buildings we erect are not made of marble, but of decisions that determine who we become in the eyes of those who come after us. Who was the man who conceived the idea of building a castle not just large, but twice the size of the famous Mentmore Towers? Why is the most luxurious 19th century chateau in France almost forgotten? And why did its history turn out to be so dramatic that it seems torn from a novel? Before you is the secret life of Château de Ferrières, the Rothschild palace that France has almost forgotten. Let's start with James de Rothschild. He was not just a banker, he was the head of the French branch of the legendary family, a man whose ambition surpassed all earthly wealth. In the 19th century, his name was synonymous with financial power, and he wanted his home to reflect this power, not with words but with stone, glass, and space. It seemed incredible that a simple baron would want to build a mansion capable of hosting not just 2 or 3 important guests, but an entire aristocracy and kings. At first glance, Château de Ferrières is simply beautiful architecture. But behind the facade lies a history of contrasts. A modest farmhouse, purchased in 1829, grows into a monumental palace, valued as the most luxurious 19th century chateau in France. And no one could have predicted that a century later it would endure devastation, occupation, oblivion, before coming back to life. But in a new role, and in this dual space, between past and future, wealth and loss, a drama unfolds that few know. How could the man who created the chateau end up ruined, despite his fortune? How could a great family owning such a palace decide to hand it over into foreign hands? And what does its silent grandeur say about this place today? This story is not just about a palace. It is about a man whose ambition and strategy cultivated a masterpiece. It is about a home that became a symbol not only of wealth, but also of inner emptiness and transformation. And perhaps about a legacy that is much deeper than marble and glass. Behind the doors of Ferrières lies much more than you think, and its secrets are only just beginning. The origins of Château de Ferrières' story go far beyond its marble facades, into a world where the Rothschild banking dynasty built not just a financial empire, but an entire universe of influence. James de Rothschild, born in 1792, was one of the key figures of the family's French branch. When he acquired the Ferrières-en-Brie estate in 1820, there stood an old, modest castle belonging to the heirs of Joseph Fouché. James was not merely a banker living in luxury. His entire worldview was imbued with the idea of progressive power. He saw wealth not as hidden capital, but as a tool for conquering cultural and social space. His convictions were built on calculation and aesthetics. The status of the Rothschild family had to be expressed not only in account figures, but also in architecture, education, and art. He began to act strategically. First, he accumulated land around the estate. Then he invited an architect who could embody his ambitions in stone. Thus, James was laying the foundation not only for a palace, but also for a symbol of a new lineage whose money and taste were simultaneously a cultural force. The social conflict he faced can be imagined as a clash of new money with the more traditional gentry, the old aristocracy of the Second Empire. For many, his ambitions might have seemed too loud, even provocative. But for him, it was not a challenge. It was a strategy. He was not a dreamer who simply loved luxury. He was a strategist who calculated that his palace would become a place where not just guests, but the world's elite, kings, and cultural luminaries would gather. He understood that power was not only about finances, but also about symbols, and luxury could be the most potent language of influence. At the same time, he was not unambiguous. Yes, he had enormous resources, but he wasn't simply chasing ostentation. Within his motivation there was calculation. He dreams, but does so like an entrepreneur, meticulously planning every step. The rise of Ferrières began with an alliance that changed everything, not just a merging of capital, but a meeting of two worlds. The second key character in this story is not a competitor, but precisely an ally, the architectural genius Joseph Paxton, invited by James de Rothschild to create the palace the banker himself had dreamed of. Paxton had already become famous thanks to the Crystal Palace, built in London, and had a direct connection to Mentmore Towers, an estate belonging to another branch of the Rothschild family. It was James, upon seeing the kindred Mentmore, who reportedly told Paxton, "Make me a Mentmore, only bigger." This strategic alliance meant much more than just commissioning an architect. It was an act of declaration. The Rothschild lineage of France was not merely participating in the aristocratic circle, it was the creator of a new cultural space, whose place was comparable to that of the British English gentry. Paxton, an architect with an international reputation, brings his architectural philosophy, his passion for glass, iron, and innovative forms, and thereby transforms the face of Ferrières. Construction begins in 1855. Construction lasts until 1859. At the heart of the project is not merely an enormous house, but a grandiose building in the Neo-Renaissance style, which combines elements of the Italian Renaissance and English forms. Furthermore, Paxton doesn't just build. He designs an idea, a house designed for 100 servants and accommodation for 80 horses, according to the Rothschild Family Archive, family.rothschildarchive.org. And an important architectural move, the kitchen was placed separately from the main building so that cooking odors would not penetrate the master's bedrooms, and food was delivered via underground routes. Narrow underground rails led from the kitchen to the palace halls. Thus, a symbolic fusion is formed. A new financial dynasty, aspiring to aristocratic status, unites with an architect whose style and technical approach represented modernity. This alliance is not merely a construction deal, but a strategic investment in a symbol of power and culture. With the emergence of Ferrières, James's position in society changes. He is no longer merely a banker. He is the owner of a palace that can compete with royal residences. His status becomes not a financial abstract, but a tangible one, a home capable of hosting the highest nobility, the emperor himself. And on this scale, a new object emerges, not merely a castle, but a living symbol of influence. Ferrières becomes not merely a residence, but a platform for ambitions, a place where bankers become not just wealthy individuals, but architects of their own legend. The first impression of Château de Ferrières is the silence of its scale. The building, completed at the end of 1859, stands above the landscape like a monument of the Second Empire era, a rectangular volume, 2 terraces, 4 corner pavilions, neo-Renaissance style facades that seem deliberately to emphasize the owner's ambition. When a guest passed through the main gates, they left the world of rural Île-de-France and entered a space where every line was calculated, every column a statement. An atmosphere not of luxury but of power, expressed through aesthetics. This was precisely the psychological reflection of James de Rothschild, a restrained facade behind which lay a program of absolute control over the environment. Upon entering, the guest found themselves in a large central hall, a space many times a person's height, illuminated through a glass ceiling, created in the spirit of Paxton's love for light and structures. The ceiling glass made the sun's rays almost palpable. Light didn't just illuminate, it moved along the stone walls, making metal and gold shimmer. This was a contrast to the external monumentality. Inside, the light created the impression of a living breath, as if the house watched every step. From the hall, the path led to spacious drawing rooms. The first, the Grand Salon, decorated with paintings from the Rothschild collection. Italian canvases, Flemish masters, 17th century French painting. Here, wealth was expressed not by the quantity of decor, but by the provenance of the objects. Each object brought from a specific European art center, each frame a testament to the taste of a family that had shaped collections for centuries. This salon was a showcase of intellectual power, but a few steps away. And the mood changed. Nearby was the small salon, a much more intimate space with wooden panels, soft light, and furniture upholstered in warm-toned fabrics. It created a feeling of almost domesticity. The contrast between the rooms turned a journey through the house into an emotional pendulum. Grandeur, and then sudden intimacy. Openness, and then almost seclusion. Next, the dining room, designed for receptions of dozens of guests, where dishes arrived via underground routes from a detached kitchen. This was not merely a technical detail. It symbolized the owner's desire to separate the world of convenience from the world of display. In the dining area, there were to be no reminders of work. Everything was focused on the ritual of elite socializing. But move further on, and the atmosphere changed again. The library became James's most expressive portrait. Instead of ostentatious luxury, order, silence, austere bookshelves, where manuscripts and editions stood in systematic order. Many visitors noted the contrast. A man known for his receptions and lavish balls creates a space almost ascetic in spirit. According to researchers, the library reflected his inner need for control and knowledge, an assumption, but a logical one, considering documents about his collecting of rare editions. The rooms on the upper floors continued this architectural psychology. Guest bedrooms, numbered, were arranged in such a way as to isolate them from service corridors. The house contained over 100 rooms, and the distribution of space showed that while every guest felt important, no one gained full control over the house. Power remained in the hands of the owners. Ferrières was not just a house, it was an architectural system in which light, shadow, the height of the halls, the number of service rooms, and the provenance of the furniture. Everything spoke of the Rothschilds' worldview, and everyone who entered here felt the invisible presence of those who once made decisions that influenced Europe. But behind Ferrières' marble staircases lay a human drama far more painful than any crack on an old facade. The main heir, for whom the palace became not just a residence, but a part of family identity, was Edward Alphonse James de Rothschild, born in 1868, the grandson of the very James who conceived its construction. He inherited Ferrières and managed it throughout the first half of the 20th century. It was his lot to experience the most difficult period in the family's history. The external grandeur of the castle came into direct conflict with what was happening in the lives of its owners. Tragedy came not from within the family, but from without. With the outbreak of the Second World War and the invasion of France in 1940, Ferrières found itself at the epicenter of political and military pressure. The Rothschild family, like many French Jews, was forced to leave the country. Edouard left for the United States of America. His decisions during these months are known only through documents. He tried to save collections, property, and archives, but was unable to evacuate a significant portion. The house, conceived as a symbol of strength, stood empty, abandoned to the mercy of circumstances. It is here that a moral ambivalence arises, which makes this story tragic. Ferrières was not destroyed by military action. It was transformed into a headquarters for Nazi command. This is documented. Representatives of the occupying forces used the castle as an operations center and a warehouse for seized works of art. The Rothschild collections, among the most valuable in Europe, were confiscated. Some of them were on lists compiled by the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, a structure involved in the looting of cultural assets. But even more painful was that the house, created as a gathering place for the elite, became a platform for foreign power, a symbolic transformation of luxury into an instrument of control. The second character in this turning point was Germaine Halphen, Edouard's wife, who married him in 1907. She was not the architect of decisions related to property, but her role during the family's exile is described in separate testimonies. It was she who maintained contact between family members, coordinated correspondence, and helped preserve what could still be preserved from a distance. Her intervention did not change the history of the castle, but it changed the history of the family. She preserved the family identity at a time when the house itself was lost. In this contrast, external splendor and internal helplessness, arises the main moral question: can grandeur protect against collapse? Dom Ferrières, created as a symbol of strength, did not protect its creators. And Edouard, a highly influential man in pre-war France, found himself forced to fight not for status, but for the very possibility of returning to life after the war. Ferrières, which seemed eternal, showed its fragility. The house stood, but its owners did not. It is precisely here that the story moves to the moment when values must be re-evaluated. The crisis that befell Ferrières during the Second World War was not just an episode, it turned into a point of no return. The house, created as a demonstration of resilience, turned out to be a perfect illusion. It survived the invasion, but lost its purpose. When German units left the castle in 1944, traces of the occupation remained inside. The emptiness of the halls, lost collections, and the feeling of an invisible scar. It is from this moment that the transformation begins, which would determine the fate of Ferrières for the subsequent decades. According to archival data, Edouard Alphonse James de Rothschild returned to France after the end of the war, but his connection to the castle was no longer the same. He did not restore within it permanent life. And the realization of the scale of confiscations, damage to collections, and loss of personal space became for him that internal crisis which is rarely described in documents, but which can be read between the lines. A man who for many years managed a bank, enterprises, the country's finances, faced the fact that power could not protect what he considered a part of the family's soul. And although no direct letters where he describes his emotional state have been preserved, his actions after the war can be interpreted as evidence of a profound change. It is important to emphasize this as an assumption, not a fact. Edouard, having survived the war, began to look at Ferrières differently. The house ceased to be a symbol of luxury and became a reminder of fragility. Even his attempts to recover lost works of art, and a portion of the collections was indeed returned to the family after the war, thanks to the work of restitution commissions, did not restore the original meaning. Ferrières remained a castle that outwardly stood as before, but inwardly became a symbol of rupture. It is this moment that is important to consider as the beginning of a transformation of purpose, from a demonstration of power to the preservation of heritage. After Edward's death in 1949, the fate of the castle fell into the hands of his daughter, Beatrice Ephrussi de Rothschild, and other heirs. But the key turning point was a decision made by the next generation. In 1959, the family donated Château de Ferrières to the University of Paris, a gesture that was officially recorded. This was not merely an act of generosity. It was the family's relinquishment of the private use of one of its most symbolic properties, a gesture transforming the private into the public, power into service. Here again, the importance of the second character from the previous section, Germaine Halphen, emerges. Although she passed away in the mid-20th century, her role in preserving family ties and archives proved critically important for the heirs to be able to decide not to restore its former splendor, but to transfer Ferrières to the educational sphere. There is no evidence in documents that she directly influenced the act of donation itself, but her support for the family during their exile allowed for the preservation of a basis for re-evaluation. The family could view the house not only as a lost symbol, but as a part of France's cultural history. Thus, the crisis experienced by Ferrières transformed into a point of transcendence. The chateau, built as an instrument of social display, became an instrument of public good. The Rothschilds' personal project transformed into a gift to the future. And in this decision, a transition from status to meaning. The house, once emptied, finally received a new purpose: to serve not the failed return of the past, but the education and culture of the next generation. It was in this way that Ferrières stepped beyond the family's personal history and became a part of collective memory. When Ferrières transitioned from private ownership to public space, its history seemed to get a chance to be rewritten anew. But it is important to understand, no gesture of donation erases the past. The castle, surrounded by a park, holding within its walls echoes of diplomatic conversations, sounds of occupational footsteps, and the silence of post-war desolation, could not simply transform into an educational building. It remained a bearer of memory, even if its function changed. The transfer to the University of Paris became an act that can be interpreted on two levels. On the one hand, it was a gesture of trust and respect towards French society. On the other, an acknowledgement that the family was no longer able or willing to retain a private past where it no longer served the future. Symbolically, Ferrières ceased to be a mark of class superiority, but became a place where knowledge and culture could exist outside of ownership. Its halls, where balls and political negotiations once took place, began to host students, conferences, researchers. It is in this context that the house acquires a new role, not a guarded relic of the elite, but a space where heritage becomes accessible. However, the true strength of this decision lies in its demonstration of the flexibility of what seemed forever frozen. Where once the names of bankers, ministers, generals resonated, now the voices of young people who came to learn echoed. This is not just a change in function, it is a change in the concept of value. But the history of Ferrières did not end there. In the second half of the 20th century, and especially in the early 21st, the castle once again acquired a special form of presence in society. It became a venue for cultural events, academic projects, a center where the past was used as a stage for the future. Such a transformation would not have been possible without a long process of reconciliation with its own past. The house did not hide its scars, but made them part of its identity. It is fundamentally important that the new role did not destroy the old. Ferrières did not become a museum in the narrow sense. It became a living organism that carries memory, yet is capable of development. And here arises the key final question. Can architecture live through the fate of its owners and yet transcend it? the history of Ferrières answers in the affirmative. The house, created as a symbol of strength, survived a time when that strength proved illusory. It survived exile, occupation, emptiness, loss of meaning. It outlived generations whose personal tragedies were reflected on its walls. And yet, it did not collapse, neither physically nor symbolically. It changed. In this change lies a lesson, that heritage is not defined by who owns it, but by how it is used. The Rothschild family, having gone through losses and transformations, was able to turn its own history into a public resource. And in this gesture, perhaps, lies their most significant achievement. The house ceased to be proof of status, but became proof that even the most private spaces can find a path to a common future. The finale of Ferrières' story is not an end, but a transition. Today, the castle continues to live between past and present, between memory and function, between the private destiny of a family and the collective destiny of society. It reminds us that grandeur can be fragile, but meaning is far more enduring than walls. And that sometimes the most valuable thing one can do with a legacy is to release it into the world.